Welcome back to another episode of Fandom Slop Edited. Controversy broke out in the Godzilla fandom recently upon the release of the newest issue of the Justice League vs. Godzilla vs. Kong 2. In this final issue, we have a panel here of kaiju-sized Wonder Woman, Superman, Supergirl, Shimo, and Mothra bowing to Godzilla as the king of the monsters. Kong's there too, just kind of standing around. I haven't read this one yet because they released too many comics for me to keep up with, and I was waiting to get the trade of it, so I don't really know the context, but they defeated King Ghidorah by working together, so that's probably it. Well, this panel caused quite the stir in the Godzilla community upon seeing Shimo bow to Godzilla like this. People were not very happy to see this. Popular community member Rick the Squirrel might have been the one to popularize this discussion, but I'm honestly not entirely sure, as Rick tweeted out. Yeah, I'm not reading these Justice League crossover comics for actually making her bow to him despite being an abused animal and a victim. And I can kind of understand that perspective about Shimo, but as I responded here, I don't really understand the big deal. This has become quite the stir in the Godzilla community. Maybe it's just me, but I truly don't really understand what the big deal is. I understand that Shimo's arc is that she is abused by Scar King and she is his prisoner and he uses her as a weapon, but I guess I'm kind of curious to see how extreme of a reaction the fanbase overall has had to this. Like I said in my tweet here, I'm not really trying to start anything, but this is how Shimo was already planned to behave in Godzilla Kong the New Empire. As we can see here, some VFX previs, Shimo was supposed to have a scene bowing in the movie already, and it seems very, very likely based on context that she was bowing down to Godzilla as something of the king of the monsters here. I continued to elaborate here that I get that it's like a triumphant moment for Shimo to freeze Scar King, and that, yeah, it makes sense to me that that completes her arc, that she is the one who freezes Scar King and she does something good because she's been a villain the whole movie, but this has always felt more of a redemption arc to me rather than a satisfying conclusion to her being Scar King's victim the whole film. Mostly only because she looks so confused about what to do until Godzilla shows up charging up his super atomic breath ready to attack Shimo, which is what sparks her desire to freeze Scar King, almost as if it's Godzilla's threat that makes her decide to do this rather than her own free will. Especially because Godzilla's charging up his atomic breath here. It's not even necessarily like an intimidation display because his eyes are also glowing, which tells us he's actually planning on using his beam. Godzilla's fully on the offensive in this moment, and we see moments later that Godzilla is totally capable of responding without aggression. We actually see what it looks like when Godzilla tries to show some level of encouragement in what might be the only moment in this entire movie where Godzilla's portrayed with any level of higher intelligence other than maybe when he comes face to face with Mothra. And the behavior is so different. The behavior of Godzilla charging Shimo is consistent with his behavior when he's charging Shimo during the fight of Rio every time he's about to attack her, which is all of it. So it's just a continuation of Godzilla fighting. Also, I don't even know if Godzilla knows what that crystal does. Godzilla doesn't really seem to ever see Scar King using the crystal, or there's no real acknowledgement that Godzilla understands that the crystal itself is what's controlling Shimo. So I'm not even sure Godzilla understands that Shimo's being controlled. And remember, Kong's intelligence is higher than Godzilla's, much higher. All the apes are of higher intelligence than even Godzilla, or at least Kong and Scar King are, which is actually the whole point of the character of Kong, is that he's weaker than Godzilla but smarter than him. And so while Kong can rationalize with a human degree of intelligence, Godzilla has near human degree of intelligence but is not able to rationalize the same way. And so I don't even know if he understands what that crystal does, or that Shimo isn't doing this under her own free will. Godzilla is also not a very compassionate king of the monsters, so he doesn't ever seem to be very concerned with what his subjects want, which is maybe another reason people are upset about it, because if Shimo submits to Godzilla here, it continues his sort of tyrannical nature as he's willing to kill monsters that disobey him. In a similar vein to Scar King, who kills monsters who disobey him, it's just that Godzilla has a broader, the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few motive, and Scar King has purely dictatorial motives. So they're not the same, but maybe that's another reason why people don't like that. And that also has sparked quite a conversation in the community upon me saying that, as a lot of people are saying that Godzilla was simply encouraging Shimo to freeze Scar King here, but I personally don't agree, whereas Godzilla in Godzilla Kong New Empire has not been portrayed with any level of higher intelligence. Godzilla is portrayed as purely a rage machine who exists exclusively to kill other monsters. I think a lot of this has to do with the overall fan base really hyping up Shimo. Whether you feel that it's warranted or not is up to you, I guess. And I think a lot of the fan base has really rallied behind her, which is cool, but I think a lot of the fan base puts their own personal perspective into her, as opposed to looking at what's actually in the film itself. Or they use outside material like claiming Shimo's an alpha, which is not stated in the film and is actually not supported by her behavior in the movie when she's getting little head scratchies by Kong and is something of a dog to him. Or maybe a horse is how they're trying to portray her. But the novelization will tell us that she's the strongest of all Titans and an alpha, and if you choose to believe novelizations are canon to the films, then that's fine, but I just don't think the film portrays that very well. Generally, the idea here mostly boils down to people really rallying behind the idea that Shimo's a victim of abuse and that the film is making a larger, broader commentary on that abuse, which I suppose makes sense considering she is abused by Scar King in the movie itself, and a lot of people really rally behind that. But again, I think that's because a lot of people like to see something of themselves in Shimo's arc here, but again, I just don't know if the film itself supports that. Maybe this is just me, but I've never felt New Empire does a good job with the abuse subplot. Shimo is exclusively beaten up by Godzilla, and Godzilla only doesn't continue to attack her, regardless of if you think Shimo's stronger or not, or whatever. Godzilla only doesn't continue to attack her once she aligns with his goals. Even if Shimo was the ultimate symbol of abuse, when Scar King was killed, if Shimo ultimately continued to fight, Godzilla would have gone on to kill her. Even if you're somebody who uses the novelizations also makes that clear that Godzilla's goal is to try and kill Shimo, not to save her. But as I responded to another tweet here, I can never get behind the idea that New Empire has a broader, deeper message about abuse, or at least an effectively pulled off one, considering the only time we see the primary victim of the film, Zuko, the character who is entirely created and designed to be the outlet for us to explore these themes of abuse and how they affect the characters. The only time we ever see that character physically abused on screen is by the film's central protagonist and hero, Kong, and it's done for the sake of a joke. They turn Zuko's abuse into a gag for funny ha-has for us to laugh at, and Kong can beat the crap out of this little guy, and we, the audience, are supposed to laugh because it's a meme. And many people will try and use the argument that it's because Zuko attacked Kong, but what does that say about abuse victims? If the whole movie is supposed to have a deeper, broader metaphor about abuse, the idea that Zuko deserved it here really doesn't sit right with me. Zuko's a child, a very young one in fact, and we're supposed to root for Zuko getting beaten up, abused, and we're even supposed to turn it into figures and merchandise. And many fans consider this to be the highlight of the film, or one of the funniest parts of the movie. In Son of Godzilla, when Godzilla hits Minya, people think that's funny because they don't like Minya. You're not really supposed to root for Godzilla to hit Minya, but it's been a popular thing in the fanbase probably ever since James Rolfe started to make jokes about it. And I think that meme culture has really cemented itself in the Godzilla fanbase, that it's funny when the children monsters get beaten up. And I think you see that continue here with Zuko, even though Zuko is the ultimate victim of New Empire, in many ways more so than Shimo, because Shimo is powerful and she does have agency of her own. It's just that she is controlled by a magic crystal, whereas Zuko is simply purely a victim of abuse and a tyrannical dictator who is his seeming father, and Zuko has no ability to do anything about it. Unlike Shimo, Zuko is not powerful enough to stand up for himself. If Shimo was able to free Scar King before he activated the crystal, she could do so. Zuko is never going to be strong enough to be able to do so. And yet we're supposed to root for him getting beaten up by Kong because it's played for laughs. So I guess another reason that I just don't see much weight in this conversation is because this is a movie where the only time that our central victim of the film, Zuko, is abused is by our hero, and it's played as a joke, severely harming the films about abuse. Continued with the fact that personally Godzilla does not seem like he's encouraging Shimo to me. He's charging up his atomic breath ready to attack her. It very much seems like the film undercuts both messages, showing that Zuko's abused as a joke in the film, and it reframes audiences to believe that Zuko's status as a victim is circumstantial. He deserved it when he attacked Kong. He attacked Kong first. That's his fault. He deserved that. He earned it, despite the fact that he is a much smaller, weaker monster, who Kong should at all costs be doing anything to try and avoid hurting. And Shimo's status as a victim is also circumstantial, as while Kong is focused on trying to destroy the crystal, he doesn't seem to be doing that to try and liberate Shimo. He's doing that to save himself, and Godzilla shows no remorse for attacking Shimo with the intent of killing her. Shimo aligns with our heroes, and if she wasn't going to, she's going to be attacked by Godzilla. So I guess maybe I'm wrong, but I've always viewed it as Godzilla only doesn't attack Shimo in the end because he views her as being submissive to him. His whole goal is to make Kong bow to him in Godzilla vs. Kong, as that's become his motivation since Adam Wingard took over. Although Godzilla learns mutual respect for Kong by the end of Godzilla vs. Kong and leading into New Empire, he does not seem to have that same respect for Shimo, not until she aligns with his goals. Whether or not you believe Shimo could be killed or hurt by Godzilla is up to you. The fanbase also has a tendency to overhype Shimo in a weird way, saying that she's invincible or untouchable, that Godzilla couldn't hurt her, despite the fact that we can literally see Godzilla's atomic breath rippling through her and she cries out in pain when it happens. People even say that maybe this is just a VFX thing and Godzilla's atomic breath is just they're doing that to look cool and it doesn't actually hurt her. But I think that there's a lot of fandom hype surrounding Shimo, but I ultimately saw her bowing in Justice League comic as, first of all, in line with her character from New Empire, and secondly, just not that big of a deal, I guess. Even if in the context of this comic, Shimo bows to Godzilla as the king of the monsters, that doesn't mean she's his slave or that she doesn't have free will. Ultimately, that's a choice she made under her own volition, which is completely different and separate from the idea of her bowing to him out of pure submission. In fact, in this comic, it seems more mutual than it does in the film New Empire, where Godzilla was on the offensive, attacking her, threatening her, even in her final moments of choice. Here, the fight has already ended, and she decides to bow out of respect. Now, maybe this is just my perspective, but Godzilla King of the Monsters is one of my favorite movies of all time, and yet I personally think that the movie makes an enormous misstep by having all the monsters bow to Godzilla, as it really removes a lot of the nuance of the monsters. They were presented as purely animals in the first few MonsterVerse films, and then here they're presented as bowing to Godzilla, almost like in the Planet of the Apes films, which is part of the film's ongoing metaphor about alpha wolves, which don't actually exist in nature. And although it's supposed to be a visual metaphor showing visually that Godzilla is the king of the monsters, it's supposed to literally just be that the monsters are backing down from a fight, as they just saw Godzilla kill King Ghidorah and they don't want to fight him. Remember, the Titans actually don't really know what's going on in King of the Monsters. They're just responding to frequencies that are broadcast over the world that make them angry or draw them towards them. Ghidorah's alpha call is essentially just him producing a long-range orca call that makes them upset. I think the concept of alphas in the MonsterVerse has been taken far too literally, and the monsters bowing at the end of King of the Monsters was never supposed to be necessarily a sign of respect, at least for the broad majority of these monsters. Rodan seems to display higher intelligence than the others, as the others are animals, as continuing to present them the way that they were in Kong Skull Island, Godzilla 2014, and even in later appearances like at the start of New Empire. They're not as highly intelligent as the expanded material would present them. At least that's not the intention of the filmmakers behind the movies. There's a wisdom to these monsters, but there isn't a social structure where Godzilla's the political leader as the king of the monsters, and the only way a monster will fight him is if it's trying to rival his political status to become the king themselves. Monsters fight Godzilla because they're animals, and they fight him for animalistic purposes. Having the monsters bow in the Justice League comic is a continuation of this literalization of Godzilla as the king of the monsters. In my opinion, does overall harm to the portrayal of Godzilla in the MonsterVerse, stripping many of the monsters of their nuance, and making Godzilla this strangely infallible, yet highly fallible, king of the monsters. A king who can do no wrong, except that if you analyze what he does at all, it appears that he's highly hypocritical. Hyping Shimo up as an alpha doesn't do anything for the movie itself. It purely builds the character for the fanbase. It doesn't benefit the movie one way or the other to have her be an alpha, and that's because the concept of an alpha titan has become so muddy and worthless in the MonsterVerse. It really should have stopped with King of the Monsters, at the very least with Godzilla vs. Kong. Ultimately, Shimo bowing to Godzilla shouldn't be such a big deal, because there should never be a debate on if she's an alpha alpha in the first place. Shimo, like most of the Titans, seems more animalistic. Maybe it's because she has stunted intellectual development from being a prisoner for so long, and that's an interesting thing we can explore in the future, but this movie didn't explore that. Her decision to bow to Godzilla shouldn't be out of respect, because that's not how the Titans should operate. The Titans shouldn't bow out of respect. The King of the Monsters Titans bow essentially to avoid a fight. If Shimo bows out of respect, that shows higher intelligence, but that's also her choice and doesn't take away from her previous history as a victim. But it's also not supported by a film that asks us to root for her continued abuse, but this time under Godzilla's hand because, once again, she's serving the bad guy, so I guess she deserved it. Unless you view it through the context of Godzilla is a defender and not a literal king, and instead he is a protector, and then it starts to make a little more sense. But why he wants Kong to bow to him? I don't know. I think it's a kink.